Believe it or not, it's been 3 long months since my last view. And now that my show is back on the air every Sunday at 10:30 a.m., so too will my views commence. I have well established my intellectual disdain for progressives, those miscreants at the far left polar end of responsible and intellectually sound liberalism. Unfortunately, they have hijacked the Democratic Party, a classic case of the tail wagging the dog. Thankfully, history shows that this viral infection of the Democratic Party will pass, as the equally loathsome far-right Neanderthals were once upon a time unleashed by Republican Senator Joseph McCarthy in the 1950s, and were thankfully ushered to the dustbin of history. I turn once again to New York Times editorial writer Pamela Paul, a responsible intellectual of left liberal orthodoxy. She recently penned an editorial entitled, quote, "Do Elites Really Know What's Best for Us?" In her column, she references a new book by Frederick de Boer, a left Marxist activist, no less. Paul comments on his new book, quote, "How Elites Ate the Social Justice Movement." I will now quote liberally, no pun intended, from her column. Begin quote, "Elitism is a frequent target of criticism, especially in politics. Historically, Americans haven't liked elitists. They don't appreciate the hoity-toity who look down on everyone else. That disdain emanates most vocally from the populist right. These self-described, down-to-earth folks without airs or fancy talk. But the left also has a beef with elitism. To those concerned with social inequity, the elites symbolize a flawed meritocracy, in their view. Certain demographic groups get elevated over others and bar access to those historically deprived of power, especially political and economic power. A more sophisticated and productive critique of elites comes from Frederick de Boer in his new book, and the failings of the left seem to break his heart the most. In this, he and I are fully aligned. Begin his quote, "It's okay to call nonsense nonsense, even if you feel it's on your own side." He writes, quote, "You can defend your values while still admitting when feckless people take liberal ideology to bizarre ends," end quote. To that end, de Boer scrutinizes the self-interest of the nonprofit industry, the elite capture of the Black Lives Matter movement, and other failures and shortcomings among progressive movers. One of the bravest chapters in his new book examines the elitism of the defund the police movement, which he argues hurts the cause of social justice. Research shows more policing has reduced homicides, which disproportionately affect Black Americans. Black Americans are about 13% of the population, but make up more than half of homicide victims. What's easy for radical activists and academics to write on a placard turns out to be hard for many Black Americans to actually live with. Taking the police off the streets may minimize the possibility of police violence against Black people, but it will do little to mitigate the greater problem of all other violence against Black people. As de Boer notes, quote, "Significant majorities of Black Americans were twice as likely as white Democrats to say reducing crime should be a top priority. Many white progressives are so terrified of being labeled racist themselves that they prioritize self-protection over helping out the very people they profess to want to help, people they may not understand well at all," end quote. I have been saying this for 2 years now, all the way back to the voter ID law in Georgia, which elicited a banshee howl from the Democratic President Joe Biden and other hypocritical Democrats as Jim Crow 2.0. I pointed out then that the mere suggestion that Black Americans were incapable of completing a simple voter ID form, which was less complicated than the IDs that all peoples had to complete for a driver's license, to open a checking account, to purchase alcohol, to check into a hotel room, or to get on an airplane, was the most pejorative, racist, and condescending profile of Black Americans ever. Thankfully, Black leaders in the United States Congress called a press conference and released an editorial statement condemning Biden and the Democrats for their hypocrisy. Now, back to Pamela Paul's editorial. All I have to say in comment is, amen.